The Master Craftsman's Second Act, a story of resilience and reinvention. Chapter 1, Beginnings in Sawdust. The autumn of 1973 found Elias Martinez bent over a workbench in his parents' garage, the amber light of a single bulb casting long shadows across scattered wood shavings. The smell of pine and walnut oil filled the cramped space, mingling with the crisp October air that seeped through the gaps in the door. At 21, Elias possessed something rare, an intuitive understanding of wood grain, of how different species responded to pressure, heat, and time. His hands, already calloused from 2 years of after-school carpentry jobs, moved with practiced precision as he shaped what would become a custom jewelry box for Mrs. Henderson down the street. She had commissioned it after seeing the cedar hope chest he'd crafted for his sister's wedding, a piece so beautifully proportioned and finished that it had drawn admiring comments from every guest at the reception. "You've got a gift, son," his father had said that evening, running weathered fingers along the chest's silky surface. "Not many people can make something both beautiful and built to last." Elias was working his way through State University's business program, but his heart lived in that garage workshop. Between classes on accounting principles and marketing fundamentals, he found himself sketching furniture designs in the margins of his notebooks, his mind wandering to the tactile satisfaction of transforming raw lumber into something purposeful and enduring. The jewelry box for Mrs. Henderson represented more than just a $75 commission. It was validation. As he carefully fitted the tiny brass hinges, testing the lid's movement until it opened with a whisper-soft precision, Elias felt the stirring of something larger than a hobby. This wasn't just craftsmanship, it was the foundation of something more. Word traveled fast in their small college town. Mrs. Henderson showed the jewelry box to her bridge club, where it passed from hand to hand with appreciative murmurs. The dovetail joints drew particular praise from Eleanor Whitman, whose late husband had been a cabinet maker. "These are machine perfect," she declared, squinting through her reading glasses. "But they're hand-cut, aren't they?" Within a month, Elias had 3 more commissions. A spice rack for the Kowalskis, a bookshelf for Professor Davidson, and his most ambitious project yet, a dining table for the Ashfords' new home. Each piece taught him something new about wood, about design, about the careful balance between beauty and function. The dining table proved to be a turning point. Made from locally sourced cherry wood, it featured a traditional trestle base with subtle modern touches, a gentle curve to the supports, a slightly beveled edge that caught the light just so. When Elias delivered it on a snowy Saturday morning in December, Mrs. Ashford actually gasped as he and her husband maneuvered it into position. "It's magnificent," she breathed, running her palm across the surface. The wood seemed to glow under their dining room chandelier, the grain patterns creating a landscape of warm amber and deep burgundy. "It's like having a piece of art that we can actually use." Mr. Ashford, a pragmatic engineer, was equally impressed but for different reasons. He tested the table's stability, examined the joinery, and nodded approvingly at the breadboard ends that would prevent warping. "This is quality work," he told Elias. "Built to last generations." That spring, as Elias prepared for his senior year, he faced a decision that would shape the next decade of his life. His business professors encouraged him to pursue a corporate track, management training programs at established companies, a steady climb up the traditional ladder of success. But every evening in the garage, surrounded by the tools that had become extensions of his hands, he felt the pull of a different path. The decision crystallized one evening in late April. Elias was working on a rocking chair commission, steam-bending the curved back pieces, when his neighbor Tom Brennan stopped by. Tom owned a small construction company and had been watching Elias's operation with growing interest. "You know, kid," Tom said, accepting a cold beer and settling onto an upturned crate, "I've been in this business for 15 years, and I can tell you something about quality. Most people don't know it when they see it anymore. Everything's mass-produced, designed to fall apart in 5 years so they'll buy another one. But what you're doing here, this is the real thing." Tom gestured toward the rocking chair, its gentle curves beginning to emerge from the steamed wood. "My grandmother had a chair like this. Used it for 60 years, passed it down to my mother. That's the kind of work that built this country's reputation for craftsmanship." That's what people are hungry for, even if they don't know it yet. As Tom spoke, Elias felt something click into place. This wasn't just about making beautiful objects. It was about preserving something essential, something that connected people to authenticity in an increasingly artificial world. His business education suddenly took on new meaning, not as preparation for corporate life, but as the foundation for building something meaningful and lasting. Chapter 2: The Golden Years. Graduation day arrived with typical spring enthusiasm, families clustering around the campus quad, cameras flashing, the air thick with excitement and possibility. As Elias walked across the stage to receive his bachelor's degree in business administration, he carried with him not just 4 years of academic achievement, but a clear vision of his future. The shop he opened that fall was modest, but perfectly planned. Located in a converted warehouse on the edge of town's industrial district, it offered 2,400 square feet of workspace, plenty of room for both crafting and storage. The rent was reasonable, the loading dock convenient for material deliveries, and the high ceilings accommodated the dust collection system he'd researched extensively during his final semester. Elias had spent the summer carefully selecting his initial tool inventory. Where once he'd made do with hand tools and a borrowed table saw, he now invested in quality machinery that would serve him for decades. A precision table saw with a cast iron top, a thickness planer that could handle wide boards, a mortise machine for perfect joinery. Each purchase was deliberate, researched, and financed through a combination of savings and a small business loan his father had co-signed. The transformation from garage hobbyist to legitimate craftsman brought new challenges and rewards. Elias developed systems for every aspect of the operation: lumber selection and storage, project planning and scheduling, finishing techniques that would hold up under daily use. He created detailed drawings for each piece, maintained meticulous records of material costs and time investments, and slowly built a portfolio of designs that showcased his range and capability. His first major breakthrough came through an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Velasquez, the university's art history professor, had heard about Elias's work through academic circles and commissioned him to create display cases for a traveling exhibition on American crafts. The project required precision beyond anything he'd attempted: climate-controlled cases with museum-quality joinery and invisible hardware. Working with Dr. Velasquez proved to be an education in itself. She pushed him to consider not just the functional aspects of each piece, but its visual impact, its relationship to the objects it would house, its role in creating an immersive experience for viewers. Under her guidance, Elias's understanding of his craft deepened beyond technical execution to encompass design philosophy and artistic vision. The exhibition opened to considerable acclaim, with several art critics specifically praising the display cases in their reviews. The craftsmanship evident in these cases rivals the historical pieces they contain, wrote the state's most influential art reviewer. Martinez has created vessels that honor their contents while asserting their own quiet authority. Word of the exhibition spread throughout the regional arts community, and Elias found himself fielding inquiries from galleries, collectors, and institutions. A private collector commissioned a series of custom frames for his collection of antique maps. The local history museum ordered a reproduction of an 18th-century secretary desk for their colonial period room. Each project pushed his skills in new directions while building his reputation among increasingly sophisticated clients. By his third year in business, Elias employed 4 craftsmen and had expanded into the adjacent unit of the warehouse complex. The additional space allowed him to take on larger projects and maintain a more organized workflow. His team included Miguel Santos, a master carver who specialized in decorative elements, Janet Chen, whose background in industrial design brought a contemporary sensibility to traditional forms, and Robert Dutch van der Berg, an older craftsman whose knowledge of historical techniques proved invaluable for restoration work. The shop's reputation for quality and reliability attracted clients from far beyond the local area. A furniture designer from Chicago discovered Elias's work through a mutual contact and began commissioning pieces for her high-end residential projects. A boutique hotel chain ordered custom furniture for their properties, drawn by the unique character and obvious quality of Elias's designs. Success brought its own momentum. Elias found himself able to be increasingly selective about projects, focusing on work that challenged his skills and aligned with his artistic vision. He developed signature techniques, a particular method of steam bending that created impossibly smooth curves, a finishing process that brought out wood grain with unprecedented clarity, joinery so precise it seemed to defy the natural movement of wood. The business model was elegantly simple. Exceptional quality justified premium pricing, and satisfied clients became enthusiastic ambassadors. Elias never advertised in traditional media. Instead, his marketing consisted entirely of delivering work that exceeded expectations and maintaining relationships with clients who valued craftsmanship over convenience. By 1982, the shop was generating substantial revenue, with a waiting list that stretched 6 months for custom pieces. Elias had achieved something remarkable, a sustainable business built entirely on reputation and word-of-mouth referrals. His personal income had grown to levels that would have been unimaginable during his college years, and the work itself remained deeply satisfying. The temptation to expand further was constant. Clients regularly suggested he open additional locations or scale up production to meet demand. Equipment dealers courted him with ever more sophisticated machinery that promised to increase efficiency and capabilities. The easy availability of credit and the steady growth of his market share made expansion seem not just possible, but almost inevitable. "You're sitting on a gold mine," his accountant, Frank Morrison, told him during their quarterly review. "With your reputation and client base, you could probably double your capacity and still maintain quality. Maybe it's time to think bigger." Elias found himself drawn to this logic. More space would allow him to take on larger projects. Additional equipment would expand his capabilities and reduce production time. A larger team would enable him to serve more clients while maintaining the same high standards. The financial projections Frank prepared were compelling. Expansion would require significant investment, but the returns seemed assured given the consistent demand for his work. The decision to expand proved fateful. Elias leased an additional 4,000 square feet in a newer facility across town, creating a second workshop focused on larger-scale production. He invested heavily in advanced machinery, a computerized mortise and tenon machine that could cut joints with robotic precision, a wide-belt sander that could finish entire tabletops in minutes, a spray booth system that delivered museum-quality finishes. The new equipment was impressive, but it came with a price tag that required substantial borrowing. Elias leveraged the business assets, took out additional loans, and committed to lease payments that represented a significant fixed overhead. He hired 6 additional craftsmen and expanded his administrative staff to handle the increased complexity of managing 2 locations. For a time, the expansion seemed to justify itself. The enhanced capabilities allowed Elias to take on projects he'd previously had to decline: large commercial installations, complete furniture suites for luxury homes, architectural woodwork that required both precision and scale. Revenue grew substantially, and the shop's reputation reached new heights. However, the financial structure had fundamentally changed. Where once the business had been essentially self-financing, with low overhead and high margins, it now carried significant debt service and fixed costs. The pressure to maintain high utilization rates for the expensive equipment influenced project selection and pricing decisions. The intimate relationship between craftsman and client became harder to maintain as the operation grew more complex and hierarchical. Despite these challenges, Elias remained optimistic. The work was still exceptional, clients continued to express satisfaction, and the financial returns, while more complicated, remained strong. He had successfully transformed a small craft business into a substantial operation without sacrificing the quality standards that had built his reputation. Looking back, Elias would later recognize this period as the peak of his first entrepreneurial arc. The business had achieved a kind of perfection, large enough to be financially rewarding and professionally satisfying, but still small enough to maintain the personal touch that distinguished it from larger competitors. It was a golden moment that seemed destined to continue indefinitely. Chapter 3: The Perfect Storm. The first signs of trouble appeared in trade publications that Elias rarely had time to read anymore. Articles about tightening credit markets, concerns about consumer spending, whispers of economic uncertainty that seemed distant from the steady rhythm of his workshop. His clients, successful professionals, established businesses, collectors with deep pockets, seemed insulated from whatever economic headwinds might be affecting other sectors. Margaret Sinclair, who ran the high-end interior design firm that had become one of his largest clients, first mentioned the change during a project review meeting in early 1987. "Some of my clients are asking more questions about budgets," she said, reviewing the proposal for a complete dining room suite. "Nothing serious, but there's a different tone to the conversations. More cautious." Elias noted the comment, but didn't dwell on it. His order book remained full, with projects scheduled well into the following year. The commercial work had proven particularly lucrative. Restaurants and hotels that wanted custom pieces to create distinctive atmospheres, office buildings that commissioned architectural woodwork to set themselves apart from competitors. The change, when it came, was swift and brutal. Within 6 months, 3 of his largest commercial clients had canceled major projects. The boutique hotel chain that had been a reliable source of orders suddenly stopped returning calls. Margaret's design firm, which had generated nearly 30% of his revenue, began declining new projects as her clients postponed renovations and major purchases. At first, Elias assumed the slowdown was temporary. Economic cycles were natural, and he'd weathered smaller downturns before. He used the reduced workload as an opportunity to catch up on maintenance, train his staff in new techniques, and develop designs for when business returned to normal levels. But as weeks turned to months, the reality became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a temporary correction. It was a fundamental shift that was devastating his client base. The recession that had started in financial markets was cascading through the economy, affecting precisely the demographic that supported high-end custom woodworking. The financial arithmetic was unforgiving. Fixed costs that had seemed manageable during busy periods became crushing when revenue dropped by 60%. Lease payments on the expanded facility, loan payments on expensive equipment, salaries for craftsmen who now had little to do, all continued unchanged while income evaporated. Elias made the painful decision to lay off half his staff, keeping only the most essential workers. He consolidated operations into the original workshop, absorbing the cost of breaking the lease on the newer facility. These measures helped, but they couldn't address the fundamental problem. His overhead had been sized for a much larger operation, and there was no quick way to scale it back to match the new reality. The psychological impact was as difficult as the financial crisis. For over a decade, Elias had defined himself through the success of his business. His identity was wrapped up in being the master craftsman whose work was sought after by discerning clients, whose reputation commanded premium prices, whose skills had built something significant and lasting. Now, sitting in a workshop that echoed with emptiness, surrounded by idle equipment that represented years of investment and aspiration, he faced a reality he'd never imagined. The skills that had seemed so valuable, the reputation that had taken years to build, the relationships that had sustained his business, none of it mattered if there were no clients left to serve. Dutch van der Berg, the older craftsman who had become something of a mentor, stopped by the shop one evening as Elias was working alone, trying to complete a small commission that represented one of his few remaining orders. "Seen a lot of good men go through times like this," Dutch said, settling onto a stool near the workbench. "The Depression, the recession in the 70s, economic storms that wash away businesses that seemed solid as bedrock." He watched Elias work for a moment, noting the familiar rhythm of plane and chisel that continued despite everything. "Thing is, most of them never had what you've got. The real skill, the understanding of the craft itself. They were businessmen first, craftsmen second. When the business part fails, they've got nothing left to fall back on." Dutch's words were meant to be comforting, but they highlighted a harsh truth. Elias had indeed mastered his craft, but he'd never learned to master the business cycles that could destroy everything he'd built. He'd focused so intensely on quality and production that he'd neglected the sales and marketing skills that might have helped him adapt to changing conditions. The final blow came from an unexpected direction. One of his largest remaining clients, a furniture store that had been carrying his pieces for 3 years, called to inform him that they were filing for bankruptcy. Not only would there be no future orders, but they couldn't pay for the last shipment, nearly $15,000 worth of carefully crafted pieces that now seemed worthless. That evening, Elias sat in his office, surrounded by the detritus of a failing business. Unpaid invoices, overdue notices, loan documents that had once represented opportunity but now felt like anchors dragging him toward financial ruin. The numbers were stark and unforgiving. Even if he could somehow find new clients immediately, the debt service and ongoing expenses exceeded any realistic projection of what he could earn. The decision to declare bankruptcy was perhaps the most difficult of his life. It meant acknowledging not just financial failure, but the collapse of everything he'd worked to build. The shop would be sold, the equipment auctioned, the reputation he'd spent years cultivating would become associated with failure rather than excellence. Frank Morrison, his accountant, handled the practical details with professional sympathy. "You're not the first good businessman to get caught in a downturn," he said, reviewing the bankruptcy paperwork. "The timing was just wrong. You expanded right before the storm hit. In a different economic cycle, that expansion would have made you wealthy." The irony wasn't lost on Elias. His success had contained the seeds of his failure. The very growth that had seemed so promising, the investments that had been so carefully planned, the expansion that had appeared so logical, all of it had created a financial structure that couldn't survive the economic earthquake that followed. As he walked through the empty shop for the last time, Elias felt the weight of endings. Tools that had been partners in creation now sat tagged for auction. Workbenches that had supported countless projects would soon support someone else's dreams. The smell of wood and finishing oil that had defined his world for 15 years would fade from his daily experience. Yet even in the depths of defeat, something essential remained. His hands still knew the feel of perfectly seasoned wood. His eyes could still see the hidden beauty in rough lumber. His mind still conceived designs that balanced function and beauty. The craft itself, the fundamental knowledge and skill that had started everything, survived the collapse of the business built around it. At 42, Elias faced a future that looked nothing like the past he'd so carefully constructed. The entrepreneur who had built something remarkable from nothing would now have to rebuild himself from scratch, carrying only the hard-won wisdom of both triumph and catastrophic failure. Chapter 4. The Long Apprenticeship. The classified ad in the morning paper was modest, almost apologetic. Experienced cabinet maker seeks position with established shop. References available. Will relocate. Elias had struggled with the wording for days, trying to capture his qualifications without revealing the spectacular nature of his recent failure. How do you summarize 15 years of entrepreneurial success and its dramatic collapse in 3 lines of newspaper text? The responses were fewer than he'd hoped and more humbling than he'd expected. Shop owners wanted to know why someone with his experience was looking for employment rather than running his own operation. The honest answer, bankruptcy, debt, a complete inability to navigate economic downturns, didn't inspire confidence in potential employers. Marcus Woodley of Woodley & Sons Cabinetry finally offered him a position, partly out of genuine need and partly from curiosity about what had driven a successful craftsman back into the ranks of employees. The shop was located 2 hours north of Elias's former operation, far enough away that his reputation preceded him, but not his recent troubles. "I'll be straight with you," Marcus said during their interview, conducted in his cramped office overlooking the shop floor. "We do good work here, but it's production work mostly. Kitchen cabinets, built-ins, commercial millwork. Not the kind of artistic pieces I hear you're known for." Elias nodded, trying to project enthusiasm for work that represented a significant step down from his previous standards. "I need steady employment," he said simply, "and I think I can contribute to your operation." The adjustment was more difficult than he'd anticipated. After years of being the final authority on every decision, from design choices to material selection to finishing techniques, Elias found himself following directions and adhering to standardized processes that prioritized efficiency over individual expression. His fellow workers were skilled craftsmen, but they approached their trade differently. Where Elias had been trained to see each piece as a unique creation requiring custom solutions, Woodley and Sons operated on the principle that consistency and speed were more valuable than individual brilliance. Templates replaced custom measurements, standardized joints replaced intricate joinery, and spray finishes replaced hand-rubbed applications. The pace was relentless. Kitchen installations required dozens of cabinet boxes, all precisely sized but essentially identical. The emphasis was on accurate measurements, clean joints, and smooth finishes that could be produced quickly and reliably. There was little room for the kind of contemplative craftsmanship that had defined Elias's previous work. Initially, he struggled with the production mentality. His instinct was to spend extra time perfecting each joint, to select materials based on grain patterns rather than efficiency, to customize details that the standard process left generic. Marcus had to remind him repeatedly that their clients valued function and reliability over artistry. "Look, I respect what you did before," Marcus said during one of their early conversations. "But this is a different market. Our customers want their kitchens finished on time and on budget. They're not looking for heirloom pieces that'll last 2 centuries. They want quality work that serves their needs and fits their lifestyle." Gradually, Elias began to understand and even appreciate the different kind of excellence that production work required. There was a particular skill in creating systems that could deliver consistent quality at scale. The efficiency of movement, the standardization of techniques, the careful balance between speed and precision, all of it represented a different but equally valid approach to craftsmanship. Working alongside other craftsmen also provided perspectives he'd missed during his years as an entrepreneur. Jim Kowalski, who ran the finishing department, had 30 years of experience in production shops and could troubleshoot problems that had never occurred in Elias's custom work. Sandra Martinez, the youngest member of the team, brought fresh ideas about contemporary design trends that were influencing even traditional cabinetry. The financial adjustment was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the transition. After years of earning substantial profits from custom work, Elias now received a steady but modest hourly wage. His standard of living dropped significantly, requiring him to rent a small apartment instead of the house he'd owned, to drive an older car, to abandon the expensive hobbies and travel that his business success had supported. Yet there was also unexpected relief in the simplicity of employment. When his shift ended, his responsibilities ended. There were no client calls to return, no estimates to prepare, no equipment maintenance to worry about, no cash flow projections to calculate. The relentless pressure of keeping a business alive had been replaced by the straightforward expectation of showing up and doing good work. Over time, Elias discovered that his background in custom work, rather than being irrelevant to production cabinetry, actually provided valuable insights. His understanding of wood behavior helped troubleshoot problems with panel movement. His knowledge of traditional joinery techniques suggested solutions for challenging installations. His experience with high-end finishes raised the quality standards of the entire shop. Marcus began asking for his input on difficult projects, recognizing that Elias's different background provided a useful perspective on problems that the production-trained staff approached in predictable ways. When a client requested modifications to standard cabinet designs or when installation challenges required creative solutions, Elias's custom work experience proved invaluable. 3 years into his employment at Woodley & Sons, Elias had evolved from a reluctant production worker into a valued team member whose unique skills enhanced the shop's capabilities. He'd also begun to recognize that his entrepreneurial failure, devastating as it had been, was providing him with an education he'd never received during his years of success. He was learning about different approaches to the craft, different ways of organizing work, different relationships between craftsmen and clients. He was observing how successful shops managed cash flow, handled economic uncertainty, and adapted to changing market conditions. Most importantly, he was gaining perspective on the difference between technical excellence and business sustainability. The lessons were sometimes painful. Watching Marcus make business decisions that prioritized financial stability over artistic vision reminded Elias of choices he'd failed to make during his own entrepreneurial years. Observing how Woodley & Sons weathered economic fluctuations by maintaining diverse revenue streams and conservative overhead highlighted the risks he'd accepted without fully understanding them. Yet there were also moments of deep satisfaction. When a particularly challenging project required creative problem-solving, when his suggestions improved the shop's processes, when clients specifically requested his involvement in their projects, these experiences reminded him that his skills remained valuable, even in a different context. As the years passed, Elias found himself settling into a rhythm that, while different from his entrepreneurial years, provided its own rewards. The steady income allowed him to rebuild his financial foundation. The regular hours provided time for personal interests he'd neglected during the pressure-filled years of business ownership. The collaborative environment offered ongoing learning opportunities that his isolated custom shop had never provided. Chapter 5. The Wisdom of Experience. By the time Elias reached his 50th birthday, he had spent 8 years working for others, a period that had fundamentally changed his understanding of both craftsmanship and business. The sharp edge of financial desperation had been replaced by the comfortable routine of steady employment, but something deeper had been transforming during those years, a quiet accumulation of wisdom that would prove invaluable in the decades to come. Marcus Woodley had gradually increased Elias's responsibilities, recognizing his unique combination of high-level technical skills and growing understanding of production efficiency. When the shop landed a contract to produce custom millwork for a historic restoration project, Marcus put Elias in charge of the entire operation, knowing that his background in traditional craftsmanship would be essential for meeting the project's exacting standards. The restoration work reconnected Elias with the kind of detailed craftsmanship that had defined his early career, but within the context of a production environment that valued efficiency and systematic approaches. He found himself developing hybrid techniques that combined the precision of custom work with the speed requirements of commercial production. Working with the project's architects and historians, Elias had to reproduce molding profiles and joinery techniques from the 1890s, but do so at a pace and scale that made economic sense for a modern cabinet shop. The challenge forced him to think creatively about traditional methods, finding ways to achieve historical accuracy while maintaining contemporary efficiency standards. The project's success led to additional restoration contracts, and gradually Elias found himself specializing in work that bridged the gap between historical accuracy and modern production requirements. His reputation within the preservation community grew, but this time it was built on a foundation of practical experience with both custom and production work. Marcus, nearing retirement, began discussing the possibility of Elias eventually taking over the restoration division of the business. "You've got something most craftsmen never develop," he told Elias during one of their planning sessions. "You understand both the artistic side and the business side. Most guys are good at one or the other, but never both." The comment prompted Elias to reflect on how much his perspective had changed since his bankruptcy 15 years earlier. The young entrepreneur who had focused exclusively on craftsmanship excellence while ignoring business fundamentals had evolved into someone who understood the delicate balance between artistic integrity and commercial viability. He'd learned to read economic indicators, to diversify revenue streams, to maintain conservative debt levels, and to build financial reserves that could weather unexpected downturns. More importantly, he'd learned to recognize the warning signs of overextension and the importance of sustainable growth over rapid expansion. As Elias approached his mid-50s, he began to contemplate the possibility of entrepreneurship again, but from a completely different perspective than his youthful venture. The skills that had driven his initial success, technical mastery, design sense, quality standards, remained intact and had actually been refined through years of diverse experience. But now they were balanced by hard-won business wisdom and a realistic understanding of market dynamics. The idea of starting another business became more compelling as he watched the woodworking industry evolve. Computer-controlled machinery was revolutionizing production capabilities, but it was also creating opportunities for craftsmen who could bridge the gap between high-tech efficiency and traditional hand skills. The market for custom work was returning as affluent baby boomers reached their peak earning years and began investing in quality furnishings. Elias began developing plans for a different kind of business, one that would apply the lessons learned from both his spectacular success and devastating failure. Instead of the rapid expansion that had doomed his first venture, he envisioned slow, sustainable growth. Rather than betting everything on expensive equipment and large overhead, he would start small and build gradually. The financial foundation was crucial. Unlike his first business, which had been launched with youthful optimism and minimal resources, any new venture would be built on a solid base of personal savings and conservative financing. His years of steady employment had allowed him to accumulate capital while learning to live within modest means. More importantly, his understanding of client relationships had matured. The young craftsman who had relied entirely on word-of-mouth referrals and had never developed sales skills had evolved into someone who understood the importance of market research, customer communication, and business development. He'd learned that technical excellence, while necessary, wasn't sufficient for business success. The timing seemed right for a return to entrepreneurship, but Elias was determined to avoid the mistakes that had destroyed his first venture. He would start small, grow slowly, maintain conservative finances, and never lose sight of the fundamental lesson that had cost him so dearly. Craftsmanship excellence must be balanced with business sustainability. As he contemplated this next chapter, Elias felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation that was very different from the unbridled optimism of his youth. This time, he understood the risks as well as the rewards, the challenges as well as the opportunities. The scars of his previous failure had healed, but they had left him with a permanent awareness of how quickly success could turn to disaster. Yet there was also a confidence that hadn't existed during his first entrepreneurial venture. He now possessed not just technical skills, but business judgment. He understood not just how to make exceptional products, but how to build sustainable enterprises. Most importantly, he had learned the crucial difference between growth and overextension, between ambition and recklessness. The master craftsman was ready for his second act, armed with the wisdom that only comes from experiencing both triumph and catastrophic failure, and emerging stronger from both. Chapter 6: Second Chances. At 62, Elias Martinez stood in the doorway of what would become his second workshop, a 1,200 square foot space in a converted textile mill that had been transformed into an artisan cooperative. The building hummed with quiet activity, a potter's wheel spinning in the adjacent unit, the rhythmic tapping of a metalworker's hammer from downstairs, the soft whir of a jewelry maker's polishing wheel echoing through the brick walls. This time, everything was different. Where his first shop had been born from youthful enthusiasm and financial necessity, this venture emerged from careful planning and accumulated wisdom. The lease was month to month, allowing flexibility without long-term commitment. The space was smaller but more efficiently planned, with every square foot designed for maximum utility. Most importantly, the financial foundation was solid, funded entirely from personal savings accumulated over 2 decades of steady employment. The tool selection reflected hard-earned lessons about the relationship between capability and debt. Instead of the latest, most expensive machinery, Elias chose quality used equipment that provided excellent performance without crushing monthly payments. A restored 1960s table saw with a cast-iron top that would outlast anything manufactured today. A vintage thickness planer that had been properly maintained and still produced glass-smooth surfaces. Hand tools selected for their proven performance rather than their marketing appeal. Each purchase was deliberate and financially conservative. If he couldn't pay cash, he didn't buy it. If a tool wouldn't pay for itself within 6 months, he found a different solution. The workshop grew organically, adding capabilities as client needs and financial resources justified them. The first commissions came through contacts he developed during his years at Woodley & Sons. A local architect who had worked with Marcus on several restoration projects recommended Elias for a custom built-in project. The client was a collector of rare books who needed display cases that would protect his investment while showcasing the volume's beauty. Working alone in the quiet workshop, Elias rediscovered the meditative rhythm of hand craftsmanship. The collector's cases required precise climate control features, invisible joinery, and museum-quality finishes, exactly the kind of work that had defined his early career. But now he approached each detail with the accumulated wisdom of 30 years in the trade. The project took 3 months to complete, working part-time while he maintained his employment at Woodley & Sons. When the client saw the finished cases, his reaction was everything Elias had hoped for. "These are magnificent," he said, running his fingers along the flawless joints. "They're not just furniture. They're architecture for books." Word spread through the collector's network, a tight community of affluent individuals who valued quality and were willing to pay for it. A wine collector commissioned a climate-controlled cellar system. An art dealer needed custom frames for oversized pieces. A retired professor wanted built-in shelving that would accommodate his lifetime collection of academic journals. Each project reinforced Elias's reputation among clients who appreciated craftsmanship and had the means to commission custom work. Unlike his first business, which had relied on rapid growth and broad market appeal, this venture focused on a narrow but profitable niche, discerning clients who valued excellence over economy. The business model was elegantly simple and sustainable. Low overhead kept fixed costs minimal. Conservative pricing ensured healthy margins without pricing out serious clients. Personal attention to each project maintained the quality standards that generated referrals. Most importantly, growth was limited by his capacity to personally oversee every aspect of production. After 2 years of part-time operation, Elias made the decision to leave Woodley & Sons and focus full-time on his own business. Marcus, now fully retired, understood the transition. "You've learned what you needed to learn," he said during their farewell lunch. "The first time around, you had the skills but not the judgment. Now you've got both." The transition to full-time entrepreneurship felt completely different from his experience 30 years earlier. There was no desperate scramble for clients, no pressure to expand rapidly, no need to take on projects that didn't align with his standards. The client base was already established, the reputation was solid, and the financial foundation was secure. Elias developed a systematic approach to client relationships that reflected his mature understanding of business dynamics. Initial consultations were thorough, exploring not just the functional requirements of each project but the client's aesthetic preferences, budget constraints, and timeline expectations. He learned to listen carefully for unspoken concerns and to educate clients about the realities of custom work without overwhelming them with technical details. The pricing strategy was transparent and comprehensive. Each estimate included detailed breakdowns of materials, labor, and finishing costs, along with clear timelines and payment schedules. There were no surprises, no hidden charges, no pressure tactics. Clients appreciated the straightforward approach, and it eliminated the misunderstandings that had occasionally complicated his earlier work. Quality control became an obsession, but a systematic one. Every piece went through multiple inspection phases, with detailed checklists that ensured nothing was overlooked. Finishing was done in controlled conditions with carefully monitored drying times. Hardware was sourced from premium suppliers and installed with precision that bordered on the obsessive. The workshop itself evolved to support this quality-focused approach. Elias installed a sophisticated dust collection system that maintained clean air for finishing work. He added climate control that kept temperature and humidity within tight ranges, preventing wood movement that could compromise joints. Storage systems kept materials organized and protected, ensuring that every project started with perfect raw materials. 3 years into full-time operation, the business had achieved something remarkable: consistent profitability without growth pressure. The client list was stable, but not expanding rapidly. Projects were challenging but manageable. Income was sufficient but not extravagant. Most importantly, the work remained deeply satisfying on both artistic and professional levels. Elias had discovered the secret that had eluded him during his first entrepreneurial venture. Sustainable success meant finding the right balance between ambition and capacity, between growth and stability, between profit and satisfaction. The business was sized to his abilities and resources, designed to thrive without constant expansion or ever-increasing complexity. Chapter 7. Mastery Refined. The invitation arrived on heavy paper stock, embossed with gold lettering that spoke of serious money and serious expectations. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, recently widowed and inheriting one of the region's most significant private art collections, was seeking proposals for a complete gallery renovation in her historic mansion. The project would require not just custom display cases and frames, but architectural millwork that would integrate seamlessly with the home's 1920s craftsmanship while meeting contemporary conservation standards. Elias studied the invitation with the careful attention he now brought to all potential projects. At 67, He had learned to be selective about commissions, choosing work that challenged his skills while fitting within his carefully managed capacity. The Blackwood project represented exactly the kind of high-profile, technically demanding work that had defined the best of his career. The mansion sat on a landscaped hillside overlooking the river, its limestone facade and copper roof speaking of an era when craftsmanship and materials were never compromised for economy. Mrs. Blackwood, elegant and precise in her 70s, met him in the main gallery where paintings by regional masters hung alongside works by nationally recognized artists. "I understand you specialize in museum-quality work," she said, gesturing toward the existing display cases that clearly dated to the home's original construction. "These cases have served their purpose, but they don't meet current conservation standards. The collection deserves better protection." As they toured the gallery spaces, Elias found himself simultaneously impressed by the quality of the original millwork and excited by the technical challenges the project would present. The new cases would need to provide climate control, UV protection, and security features while maintaining the visual harmony of the original architecture. Each piece would essentially be a precision instrument disguised as fine furniture. The design phase took 3 months, involving consultations with conservation specialists, research into period-appropriate details, and careful coordination with the mansion's restoration architect. Elias approached the project with a methodical thoroughness that had become his trademark, creating detailed drawings and full-scale mock-ups to ensure that every element met both functional and aesthetic requirements. Mrs. Blackwood proved to be an ideal client, knowledgeable about both art and craftsmanship, clear in her expectations, and generous in her appreciation of quality work. She understood the time required to execute the project properly and never pressured Elias to compromise standards for speed. When he recommended upgrading certain specifications to improve long-term performance, she agreed without hesitation. The fabrication process stretched over 8 months, with Elias working alone except for occasional assistance with installation. Each case was essentially a custom climate control system concealed within furniture-grade cabinetry. The joinery had to be absolutely airtight while remaining invisible. The hardware had to operate silently while providing museum-level security. The finishes had to match the patina of 90-year-old woodwork while incorporating modern protective coatings. The technical challenges pushed Elias's skills in new directions. He developed innovative solutions for integrating electronic climate control systems with traditional millwork. He perfected finishing techniques that achieved period-appropriate aging effects without compromising durability. He created custom hardware that provided contemporary functionality while maintaining visual consistency with the original architecture. Throughout the project, Elias found himself drawing on every aspect of his accumulated experience. The precision techniques learned during his early custom work were essential for the exacting tolerances required. The production efficiency methods absorbed during his employment years helped him manage the project's complexity. The business wisdom gained from his first venture's failure ensured that he maintained realistic timelines and healthy profit margins. The installation was a masterpiece of planning and execution. Each case had been designed to fit through doorways and around architectural obstacles that couldn't be modified. Assembly sequences had been rehearsed in the workshop to minimize on-site time. Every component was labeled and organized to ensure smooth installation without damage to the mansion's existing finishes. When the project was completed, the transformation was striking. The new cases appeared to have been part of the original architecture, their proportions and details in perfect harmony with the surrounding millwork. Yet they provided protection and display capabilities that far exceeded what had been possible when the mansion was built. Mrs. Blackwood's reaction exceeded even Elias's expectations. "You've created something that honors both the art and the architecture," she said during the final walkthrough. "These cases don't just protect the collection, they enhance it. Each piece looks more beautiful because of how you've chosen to display it." The Blackwood project became a cornerstone of Elias's mature practice, demonstrating his ability to handle complex, high-stakes commissions while maintaining the personal attention and quality standards that defined his work. Word of the project spread through museum and collector networks, generating inquiries from institutions and private clients across the region. More importantly, the project validated the business philosophy that had emerged from years of hard-won experience. By focusing on excellence rather than growth, by maintaining conservative financial practices, by choosing projects that aligned with his capabilities and interests, Elias had created a sustainable practice that provided both professional satisfaction and financial security. At an age when many craftsmen were considering retirement, Elias found himself at the peak of his abilities, with skills refined by decades of experience and judgment tempered by both success and failure. The master craftsman had indeed achieved his second act, but it was one that surpassed his first in both quality and sustainability. Chapter 8. Legacy of Wisdom. The workshop had taken on the comfortable patina of a space that had been thoroughly lived in and worked in for over a decade. Tool handles showed the wear patterns of countless projects. Workbenches bore the accumulated scars of precise cuts and careful assembly. The air carried the mingled scents of different wood species and finishing oils, each contributing to an olfactory signature that spoke of serious craftsmanship. At 72, Elias moved through this space with the economical grace of someone whose every motion had been refined by repetition and purpose. His hair was now completely white, his face lined by years of concentration and occasional frustration, but his hands remained steady and his eye for proportion as sharp as ever. The current project exemplified the kind of work that now defined his practice. A private foundation had commissioned him to create a series of display cases for a traveling exhibition of American craft objects. The cases needed to be not only museum quality in their construction and conservation features, but also designed for frequent assembly and disassembly as the exhibition moved from venue to venue. The technical requirements were formidable. Each case had to be structurally sound yet completely knocked down. The joints had to be precise enough to ensure proper reassembly by museum staff who might never have worked with fine furniture. The climate control systems had to function reliably despite repeated handling and transport. Most challenging of all, the cases had to look effortless and elegant while incorporating all these practical features. Working through the design challenges, Elias found himself drawing on lessons learned throughout his long career. The precision joinery techniques from his early custom work were essential for creating components that would mate perfectly despite repeated assembly cycles. The production efficiency methods learned during his employment years helped him develop systematic approaches to fabrication that ensured consistency across multiple identical pieces. The business wisdom accumulated through success and failure-guided decisions about materials, timelines, and pricing that would make the project profitable while meeting the client's exacting standards. Sarah Chin, the foundation's exhibitions director, had become one of those ideal clients that made the work truly rewarding. Knowledgeable about both conservation requirements and practical exhibition needs, she understood the complexities involved in creating cases that were simultaneously functional tools and display pieces worthy of the objects they would house. "What you're creating here goes beyond traditional cabinet making," she told Elias during one of their project reviews. "These cases need to be precision instruments that happen to look beautiful. The craft objects deserve nothing less." The comment resonated with Elias's understanding of his own evolution as a craftsman. The young entrepreneur who had focused primarily on creating beautiful objects had developed into someone who understood that true mastery meant integrating aesthetic excellence with functional performance, that the highest level of craftsmanship occurred when technical innovation served artistic vision. As the exhibition cases neared completion, Elias found himself reflecting on the trajectory that had brought him to this point. The devastating failure of his first business, so traumatic at the time, had ultimately provided him with insights that made his current success possible. The years of working for others, initially seen as a step backward, had taught him about different approaches to the craft and different ways of organizing business operations. Most importantly, the long journey from bankruptcy back to entrepreneurial success had instilled a kind of professional humility that enhanced rather than diminished his confidence. He now understood the difference between technical skill and business judgment, between individual achievement and sustainable practice, between rapid growth and lasting success. The workshop phone rang with increasing frequency as word of his work spread through professional networks. Museum curators sought his advice on conservation display problems. Other craftsmen asked for guidance on business practices. Collectors wanted to commission pieces that would represent the pinnacle of contemporary woodworking. Yet Elias remained selective about projects, choosing work that interested him professionally and fit within his carefully managed capacity. At this stage of his career, money was no longer the primary motivation. His years of conservative financial management had provided security, and his modest lifestyle required relatively little income to maintain. Instead, he chose projects based on their technical challenges, their potential contribution to his craft knowledge, and the quality of the relationships they would create. The exhibition cases project exemplified this approach, technically demanding, professionally significant, and involving collaboration with knowledgeable clients who appreciated excellence. One afternoon, as Elias was applying the final coats of finish to the exhibition cases, Marcus Woodley stopped by for his occasional visit. Now in his 80s, Marcus had become something of a mentor and friend, someone who could appreciate both the technical excellence of the work and the business wisdom that had made it possible. "You know," Marcus said, running his fingers along one of the case's perfectly smooth surfaces, "when you first came to work for me, I thought you were just another craftsman who'd gotten in over his head business-wise. I figured you had good hands but poor judgment." He paused, examining the sophisticated hardware that allowed the cases to be assembled without tools yet remain absolutely rigid when locked. "But you learned something during those years that most craftsmen never figure out. You learned that being good at the work isn't enough. You have to be good at the business of the work." Marcus's observation captured something essential about Elias's journey. The master craftsman who had emerged from bankruptcy and employment to create a second, more successful enterprise had achieved something rarer than technical excellence. He had learned to balance artistic integrity with business sustainability, creative ambition with practical limitations, individual achievement with long-term stability. As the exhibition cases were crated for shipment, Elias felt the satisfaction that came from work that met every standard he could apply to it. The pieces were technically flawless, aesthetically coherent, and functionally superior. More importantly, they represented the culmination of skills developed over 4 decades and refined through both triumph and failure. The master craftsman's second act had indeed surpassed his first, not just in terms of financial success or professional recognition, but in the deeper satisfaction that came from work that integrated all aspects of his accumulated knowledge and experience. He had achieved something that few entrepreneurs ever accomplish: the wisdom to build sustainable success on a foundation of hard-earned understanding about both the possibilities and the limits of individual achievement. Epilogue: The Enduring Craft. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, written in the careful handwriting of someone for whom penmanship had once been a formal subject. James Morrison, age 28, recent graduate of a prestigious design school, had heard about Elias's work through museum connections and was seeking an apprenticeship. Not employment exactly, but the opportunity to learn traditional techniques from someone who had mastered both the craft and the business of fine woodworking. Elias set the letter aside, unsure how to respond. At 75, he had been contemplating the gradual winding down of his practice rather than expanding it to include teaching responsibilities. The workshop had achieved a kind of perfect equilibrium, challenging projects that utilized his full range of skills, financial stability that allowed him to be selective about commissions, and a pace of work that provided satisfaction without stress. Yet something about the young man's letter intrigued him. Morrison had studied furniture design but recognized that his education had focused on concept development rather than execution skills. He understood that digital design tools, however sophisticated, couldn't replace the accumulated knowledge that came from decades of working with wood, understanding its characteristics, and mastering the techniques that transformed raw materials into lasting objects. "I'm not looking for someone to teach me to use machines," Morrison had written. "I want to learn to think like wood, to understand grain and movement, and the relationship between design intent and material reality. From what I've seen of your work, you've spent a lifetime developing exactly this kind of understanding." The phrase "think like wood" resonated with Elias's own understanding of what separated true craftsmen from skilled operators. It was possible to learn techniques, to master tools, to produce objects that met functional specifications. But the highest level of woodworking required an intuitive understanding of the material itself, how different species responded to stress, how grain patterns affected structural integrity, how environmental conditions influenced dimensional stability. This knowledge couldn't be learned from books or videos. It came from years of observation, from countless mistakes and corrections, from the accumulated experience of working with thousands of pieces of lumber and noting how each behaved differently. It was knowledge that took decades to develop and could only be transmitted through direct mentorship. After a week of consideration, Elias agreed to meet with Morrison. The young man arrived at the workshop on a crisp October morning, dressed in work clothes rather than the designer casual wear that might have been expected from someone with his educational background. He moved through the space with obvious appreciation for both the tools and the work in progress, asking informed questions about techniques and materials. "I can teach you what I've learned," Elias told him during their conversation, "but it won't be quick or easy. The kind of understanding you're talking about takes years to develop. You'll make mistakes, waste materials, produce pieces that don't meet standards. That's part of the process." Morrison nodded seriously. "I understand. I've talked to other craftsmen about what real apprenticeship involves. I'm prepared for the commitment." The arrangement they developed was unconventional, but practical. Morrison would work in the shop 3 days a week, contributing labor to current projects while learning techniques and principles through direct observation and guided practice. The remaining days would allow him to continue his design work and begin developing his own client relationships. Having Morrison in the workshop changed the rhythm in unexpected ways. Teaching required Elias to articulate knowledge that had become intuitive, to break down complex processes into learnable steps, to demonstrate techniques that he normally performed without conscious thought. The process of explanation deepened his own understanding and reminded him of discoveries he'd made years earlier, but had taken for granted. Morrison proved to be an exceptional student, technically capable, intellectually curious, and genuinely respectful of the craft traditions he was learning. He absorbed information quickly, but didn't rush the development of skills that required time and repetition to master. Most importantly, he understood that he was learning not just techniques but approaches to problem-solving that would serve him throughout his career. The mentoring relationship provided Elias with a new perspective on his own legacy. The skills and knowledge he'd accumulated over 5 decades weren't just personal achievements. They were part of a craft tradition that connected him to previous generations of woodworkers and could be transmitted to future practitioners. The master craftsman's second act was evolving into something he hadn't anticipated, a role as keeper and transmitter of traditional knowledge. Current projects took on additional significance as teaching opportunities. A commission for built-in library shelving became a lesson in structural engineering and proportion. A restoration project provided instruction in historical techniques and period-appropriate materials. Each piece demonstrated principles that Morrison could apply to his own future work. As months passed, the workshop developed the productive harmony that marked successful teaching relationships. Morrison handled routine preparations and finishing work, allowing Elias to focus on the most demanding aspects of each project. Their different perspectives, one informed by decades of experience, the other by contemporary design education, enriched the problem-solving process for complex commissions. The relationship also provided Elias with confidence about the future of his practice. Rather than worrying about what would happen to accumulated knowledge and client relationships when he eventually retired, he was actively preparing someone to carry forward the standards and approaches that had defined his work. The craft tradition that had shaped his own development would continue through another generation. On a spring afternoon, as they worked together on a particularly challenging project, a conference table that required compound curves and invisible joinery, Elias realized that his journey had come full circle. The young entrepreneur who had started in a garage workshop, built a successful business, lost everything to economic forces beyond his control, spent decades learning from others, and rebuilt his practice on a foundation of hard-won wisdom was now passing that knowledge to someone who would face similar challenges and opportunities. The master craftsman's second act had become something richer and more meaningful than professional success or financial security. It had evolved into a legacy that would outlast any individual piece of furniture, any business achievement, any personal accomplishment. The craft itself, refined through generations of practitioners and adapted to changing times while maintaining essential standards of excellence, would continue. As the afternoon light slanted through the workshop windows, illuminating the work in progress and the tools that would continue their service long after current projects were completed, Elias felt the deep satisfaction that came from work that mattered, not just for what it produced, but for what it preserved and transmitted. The journey from success through failure to renewed achievement had taught him that the highest accomplishment wasn't individual mastery, but contribution to something larger and more enduring than any single career. The master craftsman's second act had become a bridge between past and future, ensuring that the knowledge, skills, and standards that defined excellence in his chosen craft would continue to guide and inspire future generations of makers. In teaching Morrison, Elias was completing a cycle that connected him to his own mentors and extended his influence far beyond the boundaries of his personal practice. The story that had begun with a young man's enthusiasm for creating beautiful objects had evolved into something more profound, a testament to the resilience of both individual determination and craft traditions, and to the possibility of achieving not just success, but significance that would endure long after the tools were set aside for the final time.